Welcome to the kbbreview podcast, everybody. My name is Andy Davies, and we are live here at the InstallerSHOW 2025. Thank you for coming along. It's a very busy show, and we are slap bang in the middle of it, so I hope you can all hear me. This is the second of 3 shows we're doing here, and I've been really looking forward to this one, as it's about an area that, for me, really gets to the heart of what good kitchen and bathroom design is all about. The combination of style, aesthetics, practical solutions tailored to the needs of the individual, whatever those needs may be. And for those with needs that involve limitations in physicality, or as we will hear, cognitive ability, their designers and installers need to have the knowledge to be able to meet those needs. So this is really interesting stuff, and it's as much about design as it is about anything else. So this is often called accessible design. I think that's a rather pejorative phrase these days. We sometimes call it multi-generational design. So here we are, in no particular order. We have Jo Jeyes from Joanne Jeyes Interiors. Hello, Jo.
Hello.
We have Adam Thomas from the Adam Thomas Consultancy. Hello, Adam.
Hello.
And we have Tony Passmore from the Passmore Group. Hello, Tony.
Hi, good afternoon.
So the main rule is that you're not allowed to speak on this stage unless you've named your company after yourself. That's the main qualification you need for this. So before we talk about the design bit of things, I want to start, if we can, with the most important bit of design, which is to get the brief right. You have to get the brief right from the client. But clearly we're talking about things that can be quite sensitive, that can be awkward. People are British. They don't really want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to offend anybody. So I want to talk a little bit about getting the brief out of your client. Where do you start with this, Adam? How do you get the right information out of people about what their needs actually are?
I obviously have a good advantage over most designers, but you have to ask the right questions, you have to be sympathetic, and you have to choose the right time or know when the right time to ask certain things are. I mean, I've spoken with designers and they've asked me for help, and from memory they didn't even make a note or couldn't remember whether the client was an electric wheelchair user or a manual wheelchair user. And when I started asking, well, do they have any secondary conditions that a lot of people do, they didn't have a clue. And you cannot design for a disabled person or a family with a disabled person in that community without asking the right questions. And a disabled person knows this, and if a disabled person came to you and you didn't ask the right questions, it would worry them, and that would be one of the red flags to potentially not use your company. So, yeah, you certainly do need to ask the right questions.
I mean, for you, Tony, you're our bathroom guy here.
Yeah.
And bathrooms, it's a very personal space, and and you are dealing with lots of issues that may be very personal to them. How do you even approach that conversation?
Well, as a company that's involved in the design, the supply and the installation, so in other words, a full turnkey operation, we've got to be just aware of the needs of the user that it's for, but also for the wider household. And you've got to balance the needs of everybody to try and find some common ground, because we're involved in both the adaptation sector but also the non-adaptation sector, the general sector of bathrooms for the general population. And so we see both sides of the coin, and you've got to meet the needs of everybody in that household, whether they have got an adaptation need or just an aesthetic need. And it's balancing that up to make sure that everybody gets their use out of the facility.
Do you have a technique or a way of approaching the most awkward, most personal questions?
To anybody that's new to the industry or new to the trade, it's quite difficult asking difficult questions to disabled people. But you've got to be upfront, you've got to understand what their needs are, what their illness is, and not just today, but also how that's going to develop over time. Because if you're going to be designing a bathroom or a kitchen or any space with inside or outside the house, you've got to know how the needs of the users are going to need to adapt to that over their lifetime, and you've got to try and future-proof it as far as you can.
So, Jo, your speciality is in dementia, designing for dementia. So this is a very difficult conversation to have with somebody and with family members. So where do you even start? How do you get the right brief off your client?
You start with listening, asking open-ended questions, quite gentle questioning sometimes, but they can lead to other things. Be careful with your language. So you wouldn't say to somebody, what are your disability needs? You would say, what do you struggle with in the day? What do you find tiring? Are you leaning on pieces of furniture that maybe could be a grab rail or something like that? You build up trust. To be honest, it's about building up trust and having empathy with people and listening, a lot of listening. and getting to know the family.
Building up trust, every good designer should do that with their client regardless, shouldn't they? And I think but this is the most intimate kind of trust, isn't it? Because you really are talking about things that they might not want to have long conversations about, particularly when it comes to long-term things like dementia. Right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. Let's talk about some details. And I know I shouldn't talk about it in such a negative way, but it does kind of lead us into the conversation, really. What are the biggest mistakes, quote-unquote, general designers make in this area, do you think? What about you, Adam? You've been infuriated by some things that you see sometimes.
Be gentle, Adam.
Be gentle, Adam. In very broad terms, what are the biggest mistakes people make, do you think?
Not understanding the basic design principles of accessible design. And I'm in my field, I'm talking about accessible kitchens. Again, we've already covered the subject, but not asking the right questions. And it is so important. You can ask leading questions, which will lead the client and start talking about their impairment. And you can say, can you tell me more about your condition? Don't presume just because they're a wheelchair user and they say I'm spinally injured, that's it. They might, again, have secondary conditions. So you ask the question, do you have any secondary conditions? You never use negative terminology. You're always neutral. So you never use language like suffering from. Again, but there's documents on the internet, very simple documents that will tell you what language to use and what language to avoid. All this information is out there if you can look it up. And again, there are some really well-written documents on accessible design that talk about building regs. Most of my design principles now have been written into the building regs. So the information is out there. So either read them or speak to somebody. But going down to actual specifics, it's really as basic. You know, if your client is, for argument's sake, a wheelchair user, and you've designed a kitchen where you've got a beautiful bank of tool units on one wall with, 3 ovens all in a row, you've built them all at the accessible height, and then you've designed an island 1.5 meters, 2 meters away, how am I as a wheelchair user going to get something out of the oven? Because if I'm taking something out of the oven, I'm holding it, I now can't move. So that the equal logic straight away is that you have to have worktop next to the oven. But the amount of accessible designs I see that doesn't even have that as a basic principle. And there are only really 10 basic principles with getting a kitchen right or wrong for the majority of disabled people. But we actually do have manufacturers that purport to be accessible that still don't understand this.
Tony?
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. The bulk of designers in our design-led industry are about designing things that look beautiful, and it's so easy to slip into design mode when you're trying to adapt a bathroom or a kitchen. I think he's given there a fantastic example where the designer's done some of it right, but just got carried away with design. You've got to keep on task. You've got to keep focused on what you're trying to achieve. If one element of the area, the bathroom or the kitchen, doesn't work, then the whole thing doesn't work.
But that is good design, though. That is what good designers should be doing. They should be considering every
they should be, yeah. But it's, in that case there, he's thought about part of it. He's not thought about the whole thing all the way through.
For you, Joe, so much of this is not about physicality, but it obviously has physical consequences. Yeah. So what are the biggest mistakes people make, or the things that they don't consider enough straight away, the broad stuff?
When it comes to cognitive issues, whether that's a learning need or dementia, or as well as accessibility, it's assuming that everybody's the same. Everybody's personal, that's true. Sensory needs are often forgotten. So architects who love to design these big glass walls, they're a nightmare. They're a nightmare to dress. They're a nightmare to keep cool. They're a nightmare for people to live with. Glary surfaces, too much pattern. So, yeah, over-design, I guess, Andrew, is the thing. Keep the function and the aesthetics equal. Because it still should look good.
And it's such a relatively new area as well to be aware of, yeah. OK, so let's get into the real long grass here. Let's start with you, Tony, at the end here. When you're approached with a client and you've got the brief out of them, what's your thought process? How do you actually plan that design out? How do you work it out in your head? What are the principles you step through?
As long as you've got the brief, as long as you're clear about what you're wanting to achieve, and as long as that's agreed, it's then putting old-fashioned pen to paper, CAD, however you do it, to begin the first drafts. Often run that through other colleagues to try and see if it's going to flow, check it with the client, give as much visual information as you can, so that by the time the design, that may have changed a few times at this point, by the time it's finally agreed, everybody's happy that it's going to meet the objectives. But that's not the end of it. As the job starts to go through an installation stage, you're still checking in, you're still running through things, double checking things with the customer, double checking things with the designer, the installers, to make sure that the scheme, as it starts to come out of the ground, so to speak, the scheme is still fit for purpose. And that should go right through until the finishing touches.
For you, Joe, in particular, the client might not know what the right solution is. So you're looking to them for answers as a part of a brief, but they might not know what it is they need. So where do you start?
I start with how they live. I ask them, if they're able to talk to me about that, because some people, even if someone's newly disabled, they may not have the knowledge they will have in 10 years' time on what will happen to them and what they'll need. But also, if you're living with a newly diagnosed with dementia, you may not be able to process what that means. Family members are struggling with it. So it's all about talking gently about the future. So if I had a client who had a stroke and there was a strong suspicion that she also was in the early stages of dementia but hadn't necessarily accepted it. So we were talking about her sitting room possibly then becoming a bedroom at some point for her, for guests, and allowing for plumbing work to go in there for future-proofing. So it is really about listening to how they live their life, who visits their home, who they may need in their home later on, whether that's carers or extra family members, and accommodating those people and allowing the spaces to work for both now and 10, 20 years' time.
And what about you, Adam? There must be clients of yours who don't know what it is that they need, if that makes sense. You're holding their hand through because they might not have had a kitchen for 20 years. Yeah. So a part of that thought process must be about educating them about what they should have as much as what they want it to look like.
The majority of my clients are what we call in the catastrophic injury market, so i.e. they're newly injured. And I'm working with a large team of people. And so advice is very important. One of the best ways is to actually be able to take them to a showroom where they can actually physically try out stuff. There's one thing specifying that the client must have pull-down baskets, but if they don't have the upper body shoulder strength to operate them, then you might as well not be supplying them. But you touched on a very good point about working through the whole process. Yes, the beginning is very important to find out exactly what the client needs, and going back to actually you could have two wheelchair users with exactly the same injury and actually their goals are totally different. So just because you've designed a kitchen for one wheelchair user doesn't mean to say the next wheelchair user is going to need the same needs or function. So it really is important to find out what the client needs and design for that. But one of the most important things, particularly at the show are the fitters, the installers, and being able to either have installation managers. It really genuinely is important, and the amount of times I've been to a job where we've done M&E drawings and we've, for instance, put sockets in really odd places because I've worked out to the millimetre where the client needs them to be able to access them. And then the fitters come in, or the electrician has been brought in by the contractor who didn't turn up to the site meeting, and has just gone ahead and fitted them where they think they need to go. And I've been on a job recently where the whole project got delayed because all the wiring was in the wrong place, because they overrode my plans and put them where they thought they should go because they didn't understand why they needed to rerun all the cabling through the ceiling down to one spot and bring all the isolators down to one. And we found that they'd ignored that and just put the isolators all behind the actual unit or the cabinet where the appliance was going to go. And as a wheelchair user, how are you going to access that? It's the same principle that, if you're going to fit a consumer panel, you don't put a consumer panel up high, because if I'm living there on my own, I can't access it. If you think about any of these things, it really isn't rocket science. It is absolutely logical. It's just that people, particularly some of these subbies, don't think this way. They've always put a consumer panel in a certain spot. They've always put an isolator in a certain spot, but they don't think, how is the individual going to... And again, I've got so many stories, for instance, where a wheelchair user has literally, in the middle of winter, has been in the dark for 48 hours because the fuse tripped and they had no one to come in and flick a switch. If that fuse board had been just lower by 1.5 meters, they could have operated it themselves. So basically that person, their freezer's defrosted, they couldn't cook for themselves, couldn't charge phone, couldn't operate the front door because the power had gone off.
Well, as you say, a lot of this is not about having a knowledge of disability. It's about just a little bit of abstract thought, isn't it?
It's the planning stage.
Yeah.
It's the planning stage that sets the tone.
I'm going to scratch some surfaces now of some basic principles. Like, this is really such a basic question in itself, but what are the basic principles of a bathroom that you might do?
So if we're talking about a bathroom, the basic principles are, again, understanding what the customer's needs are, what their disability is. You might need occupational therapists to help you with that. But in a bathroom, which is a hostile environment, it's eliminating slips, trips, falls. It's providing sufficient support systems for wheelchair users, enough of a turning circle, to be able to get from the toilet to the basin to the shower, total level access, doors that are wide enough to get through, whether they're going to be assisted. There's needs there to take into account of others, who's going to assist them. And then you get into the products. Again, going back to what I said earlier about, multi-generation households, will it need a rise and fall basin? Does the user prefer a bath or a shower? If they prefer a bath, what's the most suitable bath? If it's a shower and the family want a shower, can we get both in? So you're juggling all the time what their needs are with what will fit usually in quite a small space. If you need a bigger space, you've got to pinch a bedroom, so you're taking walls down, maybe structural, maybe not.
So we talked a bit about building regulations, but there are regulations around this stuff, aren't there? There are rules.
There are for new builds.
Are they fit for purpose, I suppose, is the question?
No.
From our point of view, there are no specific rules apart from the general building regulations about electric, gas and so on and so forth. But it's about the support systems and working with the client. For example, in an adapted bathroom, grab rails and support systems are a key part. Going back to your analogy about the electrician putting the fuse box where he thinks it wants to go, the grab rail's got to go in exactly the right spot for the user from their seated or whatever position they are to be able to use it. Whatever angle it is, whatever shape it is, whether it looks odd or not, it's got to be at that particular position. So it's working closely to make sure that the bathroom flows.
And can I jump in again? So I really have to reiterate, as a disabled person who travels around the country and stays in hotels probably 3-4 times a month, it is so critical to get dimensions correct. And again, when I work with my private clients on the kitchen side, often when I'm speaking with the client and becoming to know, I will ask them questions about their bathrooms, because I'm meeting clients with similar conditions to myself, or people living with multiple sclerosis, whatever their condition happens to be. And I will ask them, has the architect or the designer ever asked you about how you bathe, how you actually go to the toilet? And I don't think I've ever once had a client, particularly a female client, when the designer has actually asked them, how do you do your bowel management? Some people will actually have to do their bowel management on the bed. Some people will be hoisted. Some people will sit on a shower chair and roll over the loo. Again, you have to be able to ask these questions and know how to ask them sympathetically. But if you don't know, in my case, I have to sit on the loo on average 2 to 2.5 hours every other day of my life. And so when I'm sat on the loo, I want a worktop next to me. I want that worktop to be load-bearing so I can use it as a bar. I want it at the right height so I can put my hand on and transfer. And as you touched on, so many times the bar is so low that I've got long arms. I'm 6'2", and if you set the bar at the wrong height, I cannot hold that bar to give me strength to actually lift, because my arm is already locked to lift onto the loo. It has to be at a certain height, so I've got room to push down to elevate my backside to get it onto the toilet. I need a cupboard in the bathroom because I have masses of medical supplies. I have catheters, wipes, suppositories, gloves, leg bags, night bags. That has to be stored somewhere. I need to be able to access that when I'm on the loo. The amount of accessible bathrooms that I've seen where the toilet has been designed on one wall and the basin's over there. I need to be able to reach water when I'm sat on the loo. I need to be able to reach the tap when I'm sat on the loo. The amount of times I've seen this, and/or the radiator is put under the support arm. So when I'm sat on the loo, it's literally burning my legs. There are so many issues with...
I mean, you're laughing at this, Tony. This all sounds very, very familiar to you, I'm sure.
No, it does. It does. And, you know, he's mentioned a whole load of points there that, again, the average designer can get carried away with things that look pretty. And it's not about looking pretty, albeit looking pretty might be an outcome that they want to achieve, but it's that balance.
And it's meeting the specific needs of your client, and that's what good design is.
That's at the forefront of everything.
Yeah.
Understanding the needs of the client, walking it through with them, and meeting that objective, regardless of what your own thoughts are.
I mean, Joe, all the things we're talking about here and all the things that Adam's just
I
listed...
feel like I'm being picked on a bit.
Hey, you don't want to be an interior designer in this show, love.
Never.
Going back to bathrooms, the two things that really bug me when I go into a bathroom is when we do a sloping shower. Nearly always you have the toilet and then you'll have a sloping shower next to you. I'm sure if either of you have only sat in a wheelchair, for a wheelchair to be safe, for the brakes to work, you have to have what we call 4-point contact with the floor, i.e. all four wheels need to be touching the floor. If the shower slope, the shower area is too close to the toilet, when you position your chair next to the toilet, you'll end up with your chair sloping away from the direction that you're wanting to transfer to, and you'll only end up with 3-point contact, so your chair will lose all control. And that is incredibly dangerous to the point people then can't transfer onto the toilet. So you've got to set the shower a certain distance away from the toilet. And you're not just measuring when you're doing that the width of the chair. You'll measure, because if you imagine that the footprint of a chair is rectangular, you have to do it so the chair is turned at an angle. So you're measuring from that point to this point. And the other thing is, which really bugs me, actually it was here. It was at a hotel here, and I was staying in an accessible bedroom that was fantastic. And you go into this fully accessible bathroom, and I've got this brilliant photograph. I went to go and have a shower, and the shower rose, or the slidey thing, was right up there. I went to all the trouble of transferring onto the seat. I turned the water on, and the water hit there. Not one drop on me. So gave up on that one, and I've got a photo, and literally the mirror was from here upwards. So all I could see was my forehead upwards. So again, it's simple things like either putting in a bigger mirror so an ambulant person can use it and I can use it.
Well, look, next year we'll do a whole hour session on things that annoy Adam. How about that?
Part one.
All the things that Adam's listed there, quite correctly, but they're very sort of physical, very understandable things. And the moment he says them, they're perfectly obvious. You think, yes, of course you should do that.
Yeah.
With the clients that you work with, it's much more difficult to sort of understand the concept of it. So give us an idea. List through some basic principles for us that we might be able to understand for dealing with.
If we're specifically talking about dementia and cognitive issues of any kind, it's probably light reflective value is the highest and most important thing to consider. So it's kind of getting your contrasts on your surfaces. Traditionally, we're all used to white bathrooms with white tiles, sanitary ware. You know, the grab rail will be fitted perfectly, but it will be white. So somebody with dementia, or even with vision problems, that will just be a complete whiteout. So they'll walk into the room, it will look like a whole sea of white. They won't see the toilet. They won't see where the seat is. There will be an accident. And that could be so easily changed just by changing the colour of the toilet seat, putting in some kind of tonal difference between the wall and the floor, adding easy-to-use lever taps. Yeah, avoid the mats on the floor. You know, I don't like those, do I? Because although somebody living with dementia did dispute this with me, but generally people with vision issues due to dementia, if they see a bath mat, it looks like a black hole. So it feels like that. And I had this with my own mum. I remember it very well. She felt like she was stepping out of the shower into an abyss. And it took me a little while to realise why. She just couldn't step on that bath mat. Take that away. It made life so much easier, and it made her more independent and able to do things.
And what about the kitchen?
The kitchen, again, LRV is important. Lighting's really important in a kitchen, making task lighting work really well. Safety issues. A lot of it's the same as the accessible stuff we do. So having easy to open drawers, not having cupboards that you have to try and crawl around to get into. Sensor taps are a really good idea. They're a really nice idea now.
Because I guess to the layman, they think dementia, they think memory.
Yeah.
they think it's all about memory issues, but you haven't mentioned memory issues once there. These are all, and until we had a conversation a while ago, this was complete news to me, this idea of contrast and lighting and those shiny gloss doors, you don't want them, all that kind of stuff.
It's so much more than loss of memory.
It was eye-opening for me, and it's just such an area that most designers probably wouldn't have even ever thought was an issue.
No, and I guess it's you don't know what you don't know, but yeah, there's a lot more to dementia than just memory. I mean, you can do things to help the memory. You can get some labels for doors. Open and fronted cupboards are brilliant. That kind of thing would be good so that people can see what's inside the cupboards. But no, memory's a part of it, just a part of it, though.
And a big part of and again, it comes back to a delicate conversation. You might be getting a new kitchen every 20 years. And that kitchen you're putting in at age 60, you'll have at age 80.
Arthritis hasn't kicked in yet.
And you've got to think about all this stuff so much. So, I mean, you've got to think of that all the way through. But for dementia stuff in particular, you've really got to think ahead, haven't you?
That. Yeah. So it's a gentle conversation again. And there's no reason why design can't be pretty and still be functional and still be future-proof. And things are changing. We were talking about that. Things are getting better. People like Adam are doing things that make kitchens and spaces work much better but stay looking beautiful. So there are products out there. People have just got to go and find them or talk to people like us.
It's an absolute massive market and the perfect time for people who consider themselves as a non-disabled person when they're coming up for retirement. They're either looking at either downsizing and or having one last splurge of cash on doing up the house. That's the time to really think about future-proofing. The majority of future-proofing comes down to design and not cost. There are things like, with kitchens, basic things like do not have a oven built under the worktop, scrap having freestanding ranges. 80% of all falls in a kitchen are caused by bending. So you design an oven in an oven housing where you're not bending. Design worktop next to. There are many things that we can do that don't cost a penny more. Symphony, a company that I'm working with as a consultant, we've spent the last 2-3 years doing research on designing a kitchen for people living with dementia. And some of the things I found absolutely fascinating. One of the big issues that we've got with designers, and the future-proofing would really solve it, because if we're designing a kitchen that has a lot of the future-proofing ideas for a kitchen for people living with dementia at the age of 60, when full-blown dementia kicks in, people do have locked-in memory. And we did a test where we set up a kitchen that people have been using for a long time. They knew where everything was. We then just simply moved the fridge, a freestanding fridge, from one wall to another wall, and we put a cupboard where the fridge was. And then we got about 10 people living with dementia to go and put a bottle of milk away, and they walked to the cupboard and put the milk in the cupboard because that's where their brain was telling them where the fridge was. So that's one of the problems I have as a designer. If I've actually got a daughter, a son, whoever coming saying, will we design for the mother? Yes, there are still things we can do to make the kitchen a lot safer, like having worktops with waterfall edges, which is a raised lip that runs all the way around the worktop. So if you have a spillage, it stays on the worktop. But if you start changing the kitchen too dramatically, and that's one of the issues that I've got, because a lot of the people that I'm being asked to design for have got a freestanding slot-in built-under oven. And if we're changing the position and the height of that, that can get really confusing. But if we can start as designers thinking about future-proofing and designing this in when the person at the age of 65 who still considers themselves non-disabled, and we do these sorts of features then if and when dementia does kick in another 15, 20 years, they're already programmed that the fridge is already accessible, the oven is already accessible.
We talked about this, Joe, before, haven't we? Just things like keeping the tea bags in the same pot you've always kept your tea bags in, and little things like that.
It's intuitive as well. It should be. Layouts should be intuitive, shouldn't they? There should be a natural progression. Your dining room should be near your kitchen. Your toilet should be where you need. It's not rocket science. And I think what you said, Tony, sometimes things, not by me, sometimes things can get over-designed. And it's finding that balance.
Well, let's talk a little bit about products. Let's start with you down the end there, Tony. There's one thing I've learned in my very brief immersion in this world is there's lots of products out there that are fantastic for this kind of arena that aren't thought about or designed for this arena. So what are the kind of product areas that you might use every day for this stuff?
Within the bathroom market, which is where our main specialising is, first thing we'll ask to the customer is, are they wanting a bath or are they wanting a shower? Which is their preference? And if they want a bath, then we'll go through the range of baths that might be available, adapted baths, rise and fall baths, walk-in baths, and so on and so forth. Or if it's a shower, how they're going to use it. Are they going to use it in a chair? Are they going to want to sit down, stand up? In the general bathroom market, the biggest innovation was the wet floor shower that came in I'm showing my age probably now, but maybe 20 years ago. There's not been a great development from that since, because a true, totally level access bathroom with no barriers to accessing the shower area is about as future-proof as it's got. And what they're trying to do now is the manufacturers are trying to design products. Grab rails is an example where we're going away from the bog standard white grab rails that we saw into things that look nice but still serve the purpose. Shower chairs, shower seats that fold, that don't look like they've come out of a hospital but look like a nice piece of furniture. Tiles, floor coverings, wall panels. There's not a massive amount in the bathroom market that has been developed, certainly for the last 10 years, in my opinion.
What about you, Joe? What kind of off-the-shelf products
Do we always go to?
Yeah.
Rise and fall. Rise and fall worktops are always top of the list for anyone. Adam and I were talking about this the other day, about when you're cooking with kids. They could benefit from a rise and fall worktop too. Pull-out drawers in kitchens, they're useful for everybody. Why would you not use those rather than a cupboard anyway? Contrasting surfaces are my biggest thing to talk to people about. So having door surrounds that are a different colour so that people can see the exit. Putting trimmings on side of curtains so that people can see the edges of them now and in the future. That can look good. That can look really nice. It is happening slowly. People are looking at the design of functional home things better, I think, more.
And what about you, Adam? What about off-the-shelf products?
Okay, so here we go. So appliances, there's been a huge leap forward in kitchen products recently. I'm going to name them. Neff have introduced, I think hopefully most of us know, the slide and hide oven. That is so much, that's so much safer for disabled people. And again, you think about it, an oven with a drop-down door or a hinge door, the inside of that surface is 180 degrees. When you're standing, you're coming at it with your arm at this angle. I'm lifting my arm inches away from a surface that's 180 degrees with no back or stomach muscles for balance. So one slight movement, my arm is being singed on a surface. So to have the door that slides into the oven is incredible. But Neff have just introduced a range of voice-activated ovens or appliances. So can you imagine being having a visual impairment and not being able to read the controls ever, or not knowing what temperature your hob's on, and being able to say, Alexa, turn my oven on to 180 degrees for an hour and 20 minutes. Alexa, when will my dinner be ready? It'll be ready in 27 minutes. A tetraplegic who's broken their neck, who's got no hand function, or somebody with arthritis who can suddenly say, Alexa, open my fridge, and the fridge will open automatically and break the seal. Same way, Alexa, open my dishwasher, and the dishwasher will open. For a tetraplegic to be able to say, turn my oven down without having to reach or operator control is massive. And another brilliant feature of this is, again, it can be voice activated, and or it can be operated from your iPhone and or your laptop. And think of one of these advantages is that if your mum, for instance, is starting to have memory issues, you're a bit worried about her being safe in the kitchen living on her own, you can have your mum's app on your phone with you living 60 miles away, and you can go into your mum's oven or hob every night to make sure she's switched it off at night. Or you could say, you could ring your mum up and say, have you made yourself a hot meal? Oh, yes, dear. I've made a lovely meal today. Well, you haven't touched your oven for 5 days. There's many, many advantages of this new technology that's coming on. For the first time, we've got a tap manufacturer that is doing remote control hot water taps. So one of the issues that we've got with a lot of the taps is you've either got to go push, twist, and, disabled people often with arthritis or whatever don't have the dexterity to operate that, and you're putting your arm very near a spout, and or the spout is spitting at you. There's now a manufacturer called Zip that are doing taps which just have a remote control that you can set 2, 3, 4 meters away if you want. you can now site the tap away from the sink on a drip tray, right next to where you store your coffee, your mugs, and your milk. So you can have that as a coffee making. There's many. We're just looking at a product where at a touch of the button for the first time, can you imagine not being able to pull a plug out of the sink for 20 years and having to ask someone, can you pull the plug out of my sink? Because you haven't got the dexterity or any hand function to do that. For the first time soon, you're going to be able to touch a button on the side of the sink and electronically the waste will go up and down.
What I love about all this is that's not why they were developed. They weren't developed for this reason or for that application. They were developed just because it's quite a cool thing to do.
Most of it's always designed for rich people.
Yeah. And yet here it is as a gift, but not marketed to that arena or not sold to that arena in any way.
The skill is knowing about these products and thinking, well, how is that going to work for this person and their particular impairment?
I mean, things like voice activation, Tony, in the bathroom for lighting and things like that must be an absolute gift.
Yeah, the Internet of Things is with us and it's developing on a daily basis. So, all that's possible. It's an innovation. Everything's becoming electronic. The Internet of Things is happening. Set your bathroom on your way home from work, or whatever. It's here. So things will begin to change, I think, in that sphere.
I mean, just to sort of in this country alone, government statistics, there are 14.5 million disabled people in this country. Now, it's not 14.5 wheelchair users, but that's anything from being deaf, blind, wheelchair user, someone living with arthritis. But there are 14.5 million. Why would you want to cut out 1/5 of your potential market? And just to give you an idea, the disabled people's money is called the Purple Pounds, and I think it's now running at £320 billion. And why wouldn't you want a slice of that money?
The government as well are doing a lot to fund that through disabled facilities grants that have been around for 35, 36 years. But the previous government and the current government are putting more and more money into that because they acknowledge by keeping people in their own homes, living independently, being able to wash, clean, cook for themselves, keeping them safe, that keeps them out of the care system a lot longer, but also gives them that autonomy, that independence to live in their own homes as long as they want, but safely. And I think that's not to be overlooked.
I like the idea, Joe, that you can be called in as a consultant to help other designers do the right thing in this kind of area.
I think collaboration has to be key. Ask Adam. I'm always ringing him because I don't know everything. How can I? Nobody knows everything. And, I'll call on an occupational therapist. They're amazing. A lighting specialist. Why would you not ask for help? If I needed a help with the bathroom, I'm going to call Tony now. That is the best way to do it. Why not? You can't pretend to your client that you know something that you don't, because that's just going to spell disaster. So I think collaboration has to be key.
Lighting is a massive thing.
And it's hugely
which is
complicated.
nearly always overlooked. Or it's not budgeted for.
No, never.
Often, with catastrophic injury, you are given a budget. The solicitor's already worked out how much money is going to be spent on an average accessible kitchen. And often I will see that there are things that have been missed off those quotes that then you're having to fight, which we usually win, to get included. But again, I would always bring in a lighting specialist because it is critical for a lot of disabled people. I mean, for instance, 96% of all visually impaired people have some form of vision, and lighting is absolutely critical to whether a visually impaired person can use a kitchen or not.
Let's conclude this, I think, with, as I say, we've barely scratched the surface of this as a subject, but if we've kind of piqued the interest of anybody here, where can they go to find out more? What can they do? What resources, what guides, where would you recommend people went to find out more?
There's a number of books you can start. You certainly need to understand the building regs. That's very important. And there's 2 documents. One's called the Wheelchair Housing Design Guide 3rd edition. And there's another one written by a very good friend of mine called Jack L. Reynolds, and I can't remember what the book's called.
Google her name.
We call it the Big Blue Book. But if you really want a copy of it, if you go onto a housing association called Habinteg, Habinteg, onto their website, Inclusive Housing Design Guide, I think it's called, Big Blue Book, that explains the building regs and the reasons why things are done the way they are. And that doesn't just cover kitchens and bathrooms, it covers virtually every aspect of accessible building.
Where can I go, Joe, to find out more about your discipline?
Well, I've written a very simple guide to making your home more dementia-friendly. Website, obviously, Joanne Jeyes Interiors. I also have Integ are brilliant, as are the Centre for Accessible Environments. Is that the right one, CAE? I've got that book. I can't remember the name either. Dulux, actually, strangely, have a couple of good courses. If you're a tradie that's, a painter and decorator, they have a couple of really good courses. So, yeah, there is lots of information out there. You've just got to look for it. Or ask one of us, and we'll tell you.
Tony, you got any extra resources we can...
We've got four showrooms in Yorkshire. They've got adapted products on display, so people can come and try before they buy. And I think that's important because there's not many of those places around anywhere, is my understanding of it. And I do know from our own sort of market research and our own marketing efforts that because this is, in the scheme of things, and given that there's 14.5 million people disabled, I'm going to use the word niche. It's fairly niche. It's quite hard to find the keywords that are specific because all roads lead to bathroom and kitchen designers, and you're in that mass market, and it's very, very hard to try and sift through to find people that are specialists. We work hard to make ourselves visible, but it's very, very hard because the way marketing works, the way Google works, the way SEO works, this market is still fairly niche. So people have got to really got to do their homework, and they've got to do it before they jump. You see a lot of businesses advertising in, magazines, on TV and the likes. Like anything, do your research. Some organisations just use salespeople and not designers or not people that have got the customer's needs in mind. So it is a minefield. It is a minefield.
Well, it certainly is. But sorry, did you want to? Have you thought of something else you don't like?
You're going to moan about something else.
I'm going to just wind me up and off I go. My experience is working with a company called Symphony approached me 8 years ago to design them a range of accessible furniture. And we're at a stage now where they asked me to write a report on what was wrong with their existing range. And basically my answer was scrap it and start again. And I wrote this whole long list thinking it would never be acted on. And as a major sort of £400 million turnover company, they've now introduced this range where it's now been merged into the standard range. They've now got 25 dealers around the country who have got fully wheelchair accessible showrooms. Staff have been quality trained. Staff have been designed in accessible design. And what we're finding is, as feedback, is that by having an accessible display doesn't mean you can't use that display to sell standard range furniture. So why wouldn't you? And what the other thing that's coming back from the dealers, for the first time ever, non-disabled people, families, are starting to design rise and fall into their standard kitchens. Because why wouldn't you? Because we still have people who are 6'6", married to a partner who's 5 foot. And why wouldn't you want worktops that go up and down? And the only difference is, for those people, you could still build base units on underneath the rise and fall.
And also, sorry, can I add to your figures, that big billion number figure? There was a report recently, I can't remember if it was 6% or 9%, but either one of those, that's there's only 6 to 9% of houses that are accessible in the UK, which is ridiculous. So that has to change.
It is. Well, look, as I say, the clock's beaten us a little bit, but we've barely scratched the surface of, as we've discussed, an enormous subject here. But thank you very much for your expertise. As I say, this is all about good design and how it can make lives better. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Tony.